Greetings, my fellow Squiddos, and welcome to the Superfresh review show, where I have an honour of determining whether a piece of media is fresh or mouldy compared to whenever they are good or bad. And I like to say,
Mitch!
Cappy, what's wrong?
There's a new trailer for a new Crash Bandicoot game. You must check it out. It's cool.
A trailer for Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time. I better watch that.
How many times have you beaten this clown anyway?
3.
Really? Only 3? Funny. Seemed like more.
Oh my god! I am not even dreaming, folks. This is real. Crash Bandicoot is having a new game in 12 years! My god! We thought the impossible would be impossible, but it's finally happened. After 12 years of being sedentary, not having a new game, we finally get a brand new, original, fresh adventure. Yes, that's right. Our Bandicoot is finally back for real. And ladies and gentlemen, we finally got our wish. Finally. We are going to get a new Crash Bandicoot game before the end of this generation. It's like as if our wishes came true for this. Oh yeah, I cannot believe one of the greatest parts of my childhood is finally getting a new game. A brand new adventure. We finally gonna get the Crash Bandicoot 4 we deserve. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take this time to celebrate this momentous occasion with, of course, reviewing a game that's recreated Crash's 3 original adventures. That's right, I am already live streaming this game, and now I'm going to be reviewing this, and hopefully in time before the 2 months of Iwata is coming. So, folks, I'm going to pick up my almighty PS4 controller, and I am going to be playing what I consider to be the recreations of the best ever childhood franchise that I ever played. Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy. Oh my god, we are really looking forward to having a brand new Crash Bandicoot adventure for such a long time. We've all been waiting 12 years for this brand new game. I could definitely say this, that the last time we had a new adventure was back in 2008, and it was So after Crash Mind Over Mutant, Crash Bandicoot kind of disappeared altogether. It really was really hard to not have any more Crash Bandicoot action, and a lot of people were wondering where he disappeared to. After a huge amount of speculations surrounding the PlayStation 4 with adverts and loads of teasers, it wasn't until 2016 when Activision and Vicarious Visions have finally announced that Crash Bandicoot is to officially return with a remake of his first 3 adventures called the Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy, alongside his appearance in Skylanders Imaginators, only for the PlayStation 4. It was officially announced in December of 2016 when Crash Bandicoot was named the Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy, a reimagining of the original 3 adventures of Crash Bandicoot in the Naughty Dog era. Alongside that, there were a load of new features and a load of gameplay differences that deviated from their original versions. The game was originally released as a PlayStation 4 timed exclusive, but would make itself to other consoles, the Xbox One, the Nintendo Switch, and also on Steam for the PC. And my god, a lot of people were very, very excited. They absolutely liked how Crash was back. That's right, Crash Bandicoot was back, folks, with a vengeance. And this also led to a remake of Crash Team Racing called Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, which was released 2 years later. But in the sake of this video, we're going to be talking about Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy as a celebration of Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time's reveal. So that is why this review exists, for me to analyse the original trilogy in a reimagined form, and to give out what I think of the N.Sane Trilogy. As you probably can tell, there are 3 games in this one: Crash Bandicoot, Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back, and Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. And what do I think of the reimagined adventures of my childhood? Well, let's get on with it, shall we? So in terms of the story, there's not much change compared to the original versions, as in terms of the N.Sane Trilogy versions of the story. Crash Bandicoot basically tells of how Dr. Neo Cortex and Dr. Nitrous Brio attempts to make Crash Bandicoot the general of the Cortex Commandos, until an experiment with the Cortex Vortex goes horribly wrong, which leads to Crash Bandicoot escaping from his captors. Cortex then tries to make Crash Bandicoot's girlfriend, Torna Bandicoot, the commander of the Cortex Commando army by getting her brainwashed in order to do his deeds, which leads to Crash Bandicoot to go through the 3 Wumpa Islands and stop Dr. Neo Cortex, Dr. Nitrous Brio and their minions, and to save Torna and save the day from Cortex's world domination plans. Crash Bandicoot 2 has Dr. Neo Cortex inevitably what seemed to be him falling to his death, but a soft landing leads to him going into a cave where he discovers a slave crystal, which is known as the Master Crystal. A year after his defeat, Cortex then enlists his other right-hand man, Dr. N.Magined, to try and enlist someone to get all of the other 25 slave crystals to enslave the entire world. Cortex then realizes that Crash Bandicoot is the one to do the job and decides to capture him and fool him into believing that the planet's alignment would make a huge interplanetary force that could destroy the Earth, and that the crystals can contain the energy. That was until Coco then realizes that his plan was to use the crystals to enslave the entire planet. So it's up to Crash to try and collect the crystals, but he's wary of what Cortex is doing in the process in Crash Bandicoot 2. After defeating Dr. Neo Cortex again, Crash Bandicoot gives the crystals that he retrieves to Dr. Nitrous Brio to power a laser that he created in order to destroy Dr. Cortex's space station and new Cortex Vortex, which some of the remains actually crash down to Earth and into a temple where it releases a evil spirit called Uka Uka, kicking off the events of Crash Bandicoot 3. Uka Uka then turns out to be Aku Aku's evil twin brother, who wanted to destroy the world and was locked away to protect the world from the malice of his evilness. Uka Uka then scolds Cortex for failing to retrieve the crystals and gems and stop their world domination. It was turned out that Uka Uka is actually Cortex's mentor, kind of like how Aku Aku is with Crash Bandicoot and Coco Bandicoot. Uka Uka is hugely upset about Cortex losing the crystals and gems to Crash Bandicoot, but after believing that he did a good deed by freeing him, gives him another chance. Uka Uka then enlists the help of Dr. Nefarious Tropy, the Master of Time and creator of the Time Twister that the two are on. Meanwhile, Aku Aku then tells Crash and Coco that Uka Uka and Cortex must be stopped, and arrives into the Time Twister machine to gather the crystals and the gems and to stop the villains before they get their mitts on them. After defeating all of the baddies, including Dr. Entropy, Crash then goes off against Dr. Neo Cortex and defeats him once again. But Crash Bandicoot needs to get all the gems and the relics in order to defeat him and destroy the Time Twister machine for real. After getting all the gems and relics, Crash again defeats Cortex, but this time round Cortex, Uka Uka and Entropy are exiled into a time paradox when the Time Twister machine imploded on itself. Crash, Coco and Aku Aku managed to get out in time and were lucky to escape from the imploding Time Twister machine, ending the N.Sane Trilogy. Like what I said, the stories themselves don't really make much of a difference compared to their original counterparts, But I do think the biggest difference between the PS1 versions and the N.Sane Trilogy are without doubt the presentation and how, of course, the game is animated and all that stuff. Let me just get this out of the way. We've gone a long way in terms of technology since the PlayStation days, and this game absolutely looks well animated. The cutscenes are incredibly well animated, the lip syncing is spot on, and I absolutely think that the stories themselves have much more of a meaning, and it pretty much proves that the writing is just outright particularly amazing, especially with the cutscenes, intro cinematics, outro cinematics, all that stuff, yeah. So, of course, I'm not going to say much about the story. We've already known about that, considering that the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy has already been well known, so I think we shall move on. Gameplay-wise, Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy plays exactly like the original releases of the original trilogy, only except with a few changes to both physics and gameplay elements in order to keep the games more fresh and exciting for newcomers, while keeping the core elements for the veterans who are familiar to the original games. All three games share the exact same goal of getting to the goal from A to B and completing the stages. In Crash Bandicoot 1, Crash needs to go from A to B in order to complete the stages, whereas in Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3, Crash needs to collect the crystal from each level in order to get to the next stage, and collecting all 5 crystals unlocks that area's boss. Crash Bandicoot 1 has the simple progression of completing one stage to move on to the next stage in terms of a map layout, whereas Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3 allows Crash Bandicoot to get 5 crystals and defeat that area's boss before moving on to the next tier. And the process is continued until you get to the end game and defeat the final boss. The gems also return as additional collectible bonuses in order to complete the games 100%, as well as the relics return in Crash Bandicoot 3 in order to getting the 105% rating and getting to the final boss. Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2 also has the added bonus of having the relics also integrated in them, thanks to Vicarious Visions decided to integrate all the relics into all games. But because in the case of Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2, the relics don't contribute to the final percentage of the game for the good endings, they are entirely optional, but they are good added bonus nonetheless. Crash Bandicoot handles exactly the same as he did in his original games. In Crash Bandicoot 1, he could only spin and jump, whether it's to jump through platforms and jumping over chasms or for self-defense. In Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3, he has the additional moves that he obtained in both those games, such as sliding, slide jumping, crawling, and doing the belly flop, or the body slam as it's known as. In Crash Bandicoot 3, Crash Bandicoot can obtain new moves when he defeats all the bosses of the game. Those included the supercharged body slam, the double jump, the death tornado spin, the fruit bazooka, and of course the running shoes, which is of course good for going through the stages with the most strict time trials and getting the relics in order to get in the completion. I must also note that once defeating Cortex in Crash Bandicoot 2, you could also obtain the running shoes in order to make the relic gaining in Crash Bandicoot 2 incredibly easier. But trust me, once again, the relics are, of course, optional considering they don't contribute to the end percentage rating for the good ending. Also, as an added bonus, Crash Bandicoots 1, 2 and 3, all 3 games allow you to play as Coco Bandicoot, Crash's sister, fully playable for certain stages. This can be done by defeating the first bosses in the first and second games, and Coco can be available almost immediately when you begin Crash Bandicoot 3. Coco Bandicoot doesn't control differently compared to Crash. She does share the same moveset depending on whether Crash actually gets his new moves from Crash 3, but it is a nice lovely addition to actually play as Crash Bandicoot's sister more fully playable. However, she cannot be able to be playable in certain aspects or certain stages, such as bear riding levels, such as levels where Crash can only be playable, and the majority of the bosses. Well, except Dr. N.Jin in Crash Bandicoot 3, where she actually is playable in that boss area. So yeah, Coco Bandicoot is playable in every other area besides those that are only exclusive to Crash Bandicoot. There have been a lot of changes in the gameplay department, mostly for Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2. First of all, let's start off with Crash Bandicoot 1's changes. The most notable changes is of course the changes of gem collecting in the game. getting the gems in Crash Bandicoot 1 has been made a lot more easier, because now, for the majority of the stages, you don't have to do a no-death run this time round, because if you die after getting the first checkpoint and beyond, you can still get the clear gem, because they scrapped that rule for only the clear gems. It makes 100%ing the game a lot more easier, and especially when you got the colored gems. And this is where I've got pointing the finger of criticism towards Crash Bandicoot 1 N.Sane. Getting the colored gems in Crash Bandicoot 1 is much more harder than it was in the original, because some of the stages, layouts, as well as the physics changes makes getting the colored gems even more aggravating. Some are more easier than others, especially with linear stages and tighter corridor layouts such as Toxic Waste, if you're preparing to, of course, avoid the bouncing barrels of death, which make my fingers twindle and my palms sweat. But then, of course, there are some stages that are really ridiculously harder than they were in the originals, like, say, Lights Out, The Lost City, and, of course, let me also point fingers at the lab. The lab's gem was aggravating to get because of the fact you have to dodge so much and try patience in some of those electrified barriers that you have to avoid. And getting the color gems in Crash Bandicoot 1 is possibly some of the most hardest that you ever get to get. And it doesn't even get much, harder than that. Oh, wait. I haven't talked about Crash Bandicoot 2 yet, haven't I? Well, the colored gems are the more harder to get in Crash Bandicoot 1 than the clear gems. But it's much more easier to 100% the game compared to its original version. Unlike Crash Bandicoot 2. Where do I begin? It starts off easy enough in some of the earlier stages, but when you get to the third warp room onwards, the game starts throwing a curveball of difficulty spikes right in your face. Most of the times that I try to get 100% while practice running the game in preparation of some of the live streams that I did for Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy is aggravating. Some of the stages are just outright ridiculously insane. And the fact that you have to avoid so much that the game throws at you, this really makes Crash Bandicoot 2 the hardest game of the entire trilogy. Let's run down the list of some of the stages that I'd like to point the fingers at. First one, Plant Food. You have to go through the stage and get the yellow gem first in order to get everything on the stage in one go. And it doesn't even help the fact that you have to have Aku Akus in order to ensure that you get the yellow gem. And that means you have to have Aku Akus with you at all times. Lost all your Aku Akus? Well then, you are done for and you have to start the stage over again. Or if you hit the first checkpoint by accident, you have to quit the stage and restart the stage and go back into it and try the whole process over again. It made me lose a lot of lives at this stage, and I really did not like how Plant Food was presented in the N.Sane Trilogy. Next up is Digging It, and oh dear me, the backtracking in this game is so bad. Crash Bandicoot 2 out of the original trilogy had some of the worst backtracking I ever had experienced in the entire series. And in the N.Sane Trilogy version, I'm sorry to say that this hasn't been fixed. It has been made worse because the camera is so too close to Crash. And it doesn't even show you the hazards, especially with oncoming bees or electrified gates, until it's too late. And the backtracking in a lot of the stages is quite frankly so bad. I mean, I couldn't even avoid some obstacles until it was too late, and it really aggravated me so much. But trust me, the problems I had with Digging It and Plant Food don't even compare to both Piston It Away and Cold Hard Crash. Cold Hard Crash, without doubt, is got to be some of the worst backtracking I've ever had. And the death route is so... Where do I begin with the death route? You have to go through the whole thing without even hitting the nitros. And that's what makes me aggravated about the death route in the N.Sane Trilogy version of Cold Hard Crash. This one is so littered with nitros and obstacles. You have to avoid everything in order to ensure survival. And the fact is, you have to get the gem first, die on purpose, and respawn to the checkpoint by the death route platform in order to go through the process again. This time round, you have to hit the exclamation marked box, which of course is the switch box, and break all the boxes that you missed while avoiding everything, including the nitros. And the nitros have been possibly some of the worst places I've ever seen in my entire life in terms of platforming games. And let's not also forget that this is definitely some of the worst ever placement for obstacles I've ever seen. However, once you actually get through the death route and go back to the old stage, it's more straightforward from there, so at least it's better. But trust me, even Cold Hard Crash doesn't even compare to Piston, it's away! This stage is a nightmare to go through. You have to do backtracking as well in this stage. The objective of this stage is you have to keep one of the enemies by the shrink ray just before you get to the bonus area and just ahead of the death route platform. And the fact is you have to keep an Aku on you so you can get hit by the shrink ray because you're guaranteed to get hit. Because there's no guarantee of you not being able to avoid the shrink ray. You have to have your Aku on standby. And then, of course, you have to have a perfect timed jump in order to get over to the shrink ray and by bouncing off the enemy you've left behind in order to get to the death route. And what's even more worse is that you have to do this without dying once. Because if you die, then the death route platform isn't there anymore and you have to restart the entire stage by going back to the warp room and entering the stage again. This gave me such a nightmare to do because I swear to God it was more straightforward in the original version of Crash Bandicoot 2, but in the N.Sane Trilogy, they just wanted to make it a lot more difficult and aggravating to do. However, once in the death platform and the death route, and once you get to the checkpoint, then it's much more easy breathing from there on in. But you still have to get the boxes and get through the obstacles in order to exit the stage if you want to get everything in one run. It's not to say that Crash Bandicoot 3 also has a fair share of bad stages. Oh god no, there are some stages that really frustrated me as well. But at least the stages them are a lot more of a cakewalk when compared to Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2's worst stages. And I will say this right now, that Crash Bandicoot 3 is the easiest of the entire trilogy of the N.Sane Trilogy, mostly because you actually have the new moves and because the game were accustomed to the time trials as well. Although there are some nightmare stages to getting the gold relic and better, like Hot Cocoa, where it's more open-worlded and you have to ensure the best route in order to get in the gold relic. And because of these stupid bombs! Oh Christ, the bombs gave me an aneurysm trying to get the gold relic when recording footage for this review. And it really would make me feel so aggravated and so frustrated that I really wanted to throw my controller into the TV screen. It was that frustrating. But with all those criticisms confirmed, I will still say this, that the gameplay itself is still functional and it is still fun to play through reimagined versions of the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy. The designs are exactly the same, and I will say that while there are some backtracking issues, especially Crash 1 and 2, I do still say they are akin to their original versions of the original trilogy. So Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy still excels on the design department, especially when they know that the games were actually based off the base original versions of the original trilogy of the Naughty Dog era. And let's not also forget that the game itself actually controls perfectly well, and it absolutely is pretty damn good. Whether you're playing this on the D-pad or the analog controls for the movement of the characters, I would definitely say that it still responds pretty well. For me, I use the D-pad just for nostalgia purposes alone, because I am more used to the D-pad than the analog controls of the DualShock. And to be fairly honest, I absolutely think that the D-pad's controls work wonders as well as an analog control, and it does work well. I do think that with that being said, I think the controls absolutely are spot on and perfect. Never have I ever had any input delays, unlike what Darkseid claims to have. I do think that my control actually works wonders with Crash Bandicoot, and it does work well, especially when it came from platformers that were akin to their base originals. But then again, that's what Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy is based off, their original versions from Naughty Dog. And let's not also forget that the game itself looks absolutely beautiful. For a PS4 game, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, the game itself is also ported to other consoles than Steam, but I do absolutely like how Crash Bandicoot looks in terms of his character model. Coco Bandicoot's character model looks a lot more adorable as hell, considering the fact that she's still the younger sister of Crash Bandicoot. Cortex and Co look exactly like what they did, and they still look as villainous as ever, especially considering they are the prime antagonists of the game, and the masks look exactly like what they did. And I'm absolutely appreciative of that. I didn't like the redesigns of the Titans games, but with Activision learning the lesson of how not to design video game characters in terms of Titans redesigns, the designs of the N.Sane Trilogy look exactly like what you expect them to be. The only one that I feel that had the most subtle change was Torna Bandicoot, looking a lot less like Pamela Anderson, and looking more like a complete fighter in contrast. And let's not also forget, she actually decided to defend herself this time around in the intro of Crash Bandicoot 1, just so that she can fight off against them. But of course, let's also talk about the cinematics. In terms of animation, it is looking fantastic. The animations have been fantastically made, and I'll absolutely say that they are well animated, especially with the cinematics and the in-game animations. I just want to say, the Vicarious Visions did an absolute fantastic, stellar job at animating the cutscenes and the in-game animations. And I just want to say this right now, it looks so fluid, it looks so on point. Never have I ever seen any character look so puppet-like. And the game itself looks so beautifully animated. It is so incredible to see how long and how far we went since the Titans games compared to Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy. And I've got to say this, the animating team did a wonderful job.
Crystals, of course. No!
And let's also not forget about the audio. My god, the soundtrack is so amazing. I'm going to be honest with you, the soundtrack has been re-instrumentalized to make it sound fresh, but to also include various sounds from the original games, just for the nostalgic callbacks, so that everybody can get a nostalgic throwback for the original games. I absolutely think the soundtracks for all games absolutely was amazing and on point, and they all fitted all the themes based on which levels that they are based on. I will admit that there were a few ones that didn't really sound as, faithful as their originals, but that's not much of a big deal. I do think the soundtrack is amazing, and I could actually jam to them all day. If there's one thing I'm really disappointed about is, of course, the lack of choice of soundtracks. Whereas Spyro Re-Ignited Trilogy and Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled had a change of soundtracks, whether you could actually listen to the original or the new versions, I was really disappointed that Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy actually omitted this feature. But that's nothing I could lose sleep upon, to be fairly honest. I can also say the voice acting is so good as well. It's so amazing to hear so many familiar faces returning to reprise their roles. Those included Jess Harnell as Crash Bandicoot, Lex Lang as Dr. Neo Cortex, Debbie Derryberry as Coco Bandicoot, Greg Eagles as Aku Aku, John DiMaggio as Uka Uka, and Maurice LaMarche as Dr. Embryo. Corey Burton also returned to the Crash Bandicoot fray after a long time, and let me also say, his performances as Dr. Engine and Dr. Nefarious Tropy were some of the best I've ever heard from him. In fact, he did a much better job, much better than Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex by a long shot. I was really surprised that Corey Burton hit the spot much better than Wrath of Cortex, and I definitely say that his voice acting for Engine and Tropy absolutely hit the mark. Other noted voice actors include John DiMaggio playing as Tiny Tiger and Fred Tatascar playing as Dingodile. And out of all the voice actors, I think all of them did an amazing job playing all of their respective characters. And let me also say this, that Crash Bandicoot also does have her first speaking role, but it's only restricted in grunts and groans and sighs by Debbie Derryberry. But to be fairly honest, I absolutely think that the audio itself is so fantastic, and the graphical presentation as well absolutely reflects on the newer hardware, considering these are fully fledged remakes of their original counterparts. So that's something I would like to say about that. So for the verdict of Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy, the game is a great way to rediscover and replay the classics that defined your childhood in the late 1990s. Crash Bandicoot without doubt was a massive success on the PlayStation and became a very well-known video gaming brand. And Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy does exactly that. It does have some of its flaws, like certain hitbox detection issues, some backtracking issues, and incredibly high difficulty spikes, especially in Crash Bandicoot 2. I can still recommend this game to any platforming or any Crash Bandicoot enthusiast. For 3 games in one unique package, it is absolutely worth it. It goes for £30 in the UK, although I'm pretty sure it is $40 in the United States. But of course there are sales, which of course make the game go at half price. So if you buy the game at half price, it is basically a big bonus, as you have a free game in one package, and you will be having a lot of fun going through Crash's 3 amazing adventures that started off his video gaming career. So with that being said, I am going to give the game a freshness rating of an A. Crash Bandicoot N.Sane Trilogy is a great package, albeit pretty difficult at times, but still worth it. Oh my god. Playing through these 3 games is pretty tough. To be fairly honest, me live streaming them, they are really difficult games, and my god, the difficulty is ramped up significantly. It's like the Dark Souls of the Crash Bandicoot universe. You know, the original version's been done, but the difficulty being ramped up significantly. Still, it is not all that bad, to be fairly honest. Those difficulty spike problems and certain hitbox detection issues does not even ruin what I consider to be a great reiteration and faithful recreations of some of the greatest childhoods that have been created thanks to that completely fantastic marsupial that everybody loves dearly inside their gaming heart. And this is definitely something I really wanted to see. Crash Bandicoot, hopefully, is back for good. And the same thing goes to Spyro as well. That's right. And that is the end of the review, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you can consider my feelings. We are about to head on over to the world of Nintendo. Next time, we're going to be looking at a game that basically saved the whole world from insanity and loneliness and exclusion. So with that being said, folks, I hope you enjoyed this review, and until next time, sayonara for now. Thanks so much for watching this episode of the Superfresh Review Show. Please remember to give this video a like, share it with everybody to spread the word of my new reviews. Please give this a comment and tell us what you think about the game that was reviewed today. And please make sure you subscribe to the channel for further Superfresh reviews. With that being said, I'll see you Superfresh Squiddos later.